I come to this facility, and when we talk about reminders, I can remember sitting in a meeting and she said, if you guys don't do something about this 7-figure fine, you're going to be on a plantation picnic. During that time, I was still always reminded of who I was. And when I say that, because we're having real talk here, and when I say that, I was still always reminded that I was still a Black woman.
Welcome to the Nurse Boss Shift. It's your girl, Dr. Kiiyonna Jones.
And I'm Christal P, the Beauty NP.
And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Lendra James. She is a nurse, of course, and also the host of the Nurses with Voices, which is a podcast where she amplifies the voices of nurses who have done amazing things either in nursing and entrepreneurship as well. So welcome, Dr. James, Dr. Lendra, to the Nurse Boss Shift podcast. It's so nice to have you on. I was on her podcast a couple months ago, so now she is coming to bless ours with her amazing story. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, you were on my podcast a couple months ago, and that was I love having very just down-to-earth conversations, and it was so genuine, so I so enjoyed you. So thank you, and thank you for having me now on your show.
Absolutely. So we always like to get started and ask our guests we want to know your nursing background, how long you've been in nursing, what kind of fields you worked in, and then your story of how you navigated into the entrepreneur space.
Sure. Okay. So let's see. So I've been a nurse for about 22 years. My background includes cardiac neuro, trauma, intermediate care, resource nursing. I've worked across the country. I've done travel nursing, worked my way up to nursing leadership, achieved my nurse exec board certification, doctor of nursing practice degree. And it was leadership so I'll start with this. Leadership is the direct result of my business, right? And I say that to say it was once I got into leadership is when I started seeing a different side of nursing. So my experience was bias and burnout, right? Which I wrote a book about, right? Confessions of a Nurse Executive, the conscious and unconscious bias in healthcare. And people always say, can't believe you wrote a book about that. And that's because people need to know. And so my experiences it was about the burnout and the bias that I experienced. I mean, as a nurse leader, I've built programs, right? I built units. When you talk about opening up brand new units from the hospitals, and the hospital didn't know how to run an intermediate care unit. And because I've had that experience, I was able to open that unit, and that unit has thrived, and it still thrives to this day. And no one knew about what step down looked like. No one knew that the unit, should have a medical director, right? They didn't know what the ratio should be on this in the step. They didn't know what kind of patients should go there. I partnered with education and created these units, created policies and procedures for those units, and it still wasn't enough, right? When you looked at patient experience scores, my patient experience scores were always number one. We were constantly receiving patient awards, patient satisfaction awards. We were featured on The View, my nursing unit. We were featured on The View. It was so many things that we did. We got, Magnet wasn't I doing, right? But the hospital achieved, Magnet during my tenure there. It was so much, we kept fall rates down. And then at a different hospital, again, with the nursing leadership, keeping fall rates down. And I can remember I implemented a practice called the champion model. And implementing the champion model was something that, the hospital adopted because they saw having nurse champions or fall champions could reduce the fall rates within the hospital. So not only did we reduce it within my nursing units, we reduced it throughout the hospital just by them implementing the champion model. So every committee became a champion. It became an ethics champion. It became early mobilization champion. So that champion model was adopted. And these are just a few things that was accomplished during my tenure in leadership. Because during that time, I was still always reminded of who I was. And when I say that, because we're having real talk, and when I say that, I was still always reminded that I was still a Black woman. I'll give you an example, and I talk about this in my book as well. One of the reasons why I say I was reminded of that is because I remember sitting in a nursing leadership meeting, and one of the corporate liaisons was there. And she said, the hospital was, and that's another thing in nursing leadership. They don't tell you when the hospital's in immediate jeopardy or when there's fines and things a lot of cleanup that you need to do when you take certain positions, right? I can remember taking this position and thinking I'm getting like this huge bump in salary. I'm like, okay, I'm leaving the stress behind. I'm going to get this huge bump in salary. And I come to this facility, and when we talk about reminders, I can remember sitting in a meeting, and she said, if you guys don't do something about this 7-figure fine, you're going to be on a plantation picking. And this was said in, you were about, maybe the room was probably about 40% African American, 35, 40%. So when you talk about reminders, right, that's just one of the significant, not let alone the passed over positions and everything else that goes on. So you get to a point where you're on 24/7, right? You don't really have a break, because as a leader, you feel compelled because you think the place is going to burn down if you're not there. And then you realize that thing they replace you so easily, right?
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I was saying, I'm doing all of this, making the hospital look good, making the board of trustees, the CEOs, everybody else look good. What am I doing? Right? And I was introduced to the concept of starting my own business. And here we are a few years later with me having 2 businesses, and we'll get into that. One is an IV hydration and concierge business, and my other business is a consulting business where I consult with other nurses and teach them to, one, start their own business. I basically empower nurses to break through from burnout and build generational wealth, right? Because what I learned in starting my own business is that that's what it's about, right? Like, it's about how you can build generational wealth. Because one of the things I was saying, I was just like, wait a minute, I can make, so this is what I made in a year, right? And this is my annual salary, which I just told you I thought was a really pretty good salary. But I just made this in this amount of time, and this is my annual salary, right? I was okay. More nurses need to know about this. More nurses need to know about this. And here we are, and something that I have coming up is called the Health and Wealth Expo. It's a summit that I'm hosting, and it's, again, to help nurses. It's for healthcare, nurses and healthcare professionals. And if you're not a healthcare professional, you'll still get something out of it. But it's about really building generational wealth. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, how I got into entrepreneurship and leading up to where I am today.
I have a question, and this is just so I can just put everything into perspective as far as your experience in that corporate meeting. What state are you in?
I'm in New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I believe, I'm in California. California is supposed to be like the liberalist state in the world, but even us nurses of color, Black nurses in particular, still have experiences similar to that, more microaggression. I don't know that I've ever had that particular thing happen, but I've had moments, and I always share this story where I was sitting in an interview and we were hiring for a director of a specific unit. And this amazing Black woman comes in, and like, I was house soup at the time. So it was like, they had picked some of us in leadership to like interview, right? But then there was this assistant CNO who was there, and this Black lady, she commanded she walked in like, we knew she was the business, right? And in a little bit, you felt a little intimidated, like, this lady is, she, all the responses and just all her accolades and all that. And then the non-Black person who was a CNO, who ultimately was the decision maker, when she left out the interview, she said, now, mind you, this was a room full of, I would say 80% Black people who were in there. And she said, so they were talking about like, oh, wow, she's amazing. We were all just like, oh, she's a lot. And then she goes, but aren't you worried? Like, don't she seem aggressive? That's the word that's the buzzword they use for us. And how are you going to be able, don't you worry about how you will be able to control her? Like, she seems like she would be like a firecracker, just kind of felt like it was digs. I felt it. It was just like, like, as they were saying. So it wasn't as overt as your experience, but it was still one of those that I've never forgot because I'm talking about it right now. But it was one of those reminding me, like, stay in your lane.
Don't get too big. Don't try to act like you. And I think over the years, I was talking about like I had to get out of corporate because I was losing myself. I was trying to conform and be who they wanted me to be, thinking that would get me in, right? To like where I was trying to go. And I was losing myself. And that internal conflict was leading to me being more depressed. Like I had to seek therapy, like all the things because of that experience. So I'm just thinking this is not something that just, I mean, New Jersey is progressive too. Like it's not Mississippi, but I'm just saying like, so that we have these experiences, I'm confident that it happens all over. And especially us, and I'm a woman of color, but we badass this, right? And the fact that we can identify it and take that and say, you know what? I'm going to go and use this gift that you guys are not appreciating or that is making maybe you feel intimidated. I'm going to go make my own money. I would suggest that all women, not just Black women, but all women do that, because I think that is what we are often taken for granted, and it's taking advantage because they don't realize the unique contributions that we make, right? And I think that experience right there is something for our listeners to not miss. There probably has been subtle instances like mine and yours. And I don't know, Chris, I'm sure you have them too, where you had to step back, like, am I tripping? Like, is it me? Like you question yourself, like, this didn't just happen. What I thought just happened didn't just happen. Like, maybe I'm tripping.
And that's the thing. I think you said it beautifully. It's like you start to become conflicted. And that's, and that's part of the burnout, right? Because you start to say, you start to put, it's like, is it me? Like, every place, why am I trying to conform to what society says how I'm supposed to be and act as a nurse leader or as a nurse even? One of the things that I love about being my own boss, I can be how I want to be, when I want to be, how I want to be it, right? So my clients know me, my nurses know me, I am who I am, right? I can show up as my authentic self and they appreciate that. And if you don't, then you're not my client, or you're not my employee, or you're not, you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. And that's just really how I feel. And to your point about, locations, the interesting part was and I don't think it really matters whether or not she was from New Jersey or not. She actually was visiting. So she was a corporate liaison. The corporate was in one of the southern states. So her excuse was because, I'll add to that, my CNO at the time so I reported directly to the CNO. So in my role, and my CNO at the time, she was a Black woman. And she actually, I'll get to that too. She actually reported her. So she reported her. And you know what they did? They removed her from being the liaison for our campus. She was from Alabama. And her excuse was, well, I grew up on a farm and, that's how we talk. Honey, stop talking, because I don't know if you realize, like, that just made it a little bit worse, right? Just stop talking. And so I can remember my CNO, we could always tell where she used to come from these executive meetings, because she would look so beat down because they would treat her like a nurse manager. And like Dr. Jones, you could probably appreciate this, and you probably can too. But when the CNO is like the CNO, right? Like, you look at the CNO as equivalent to the CEO, right? And when you're in a meeting, so when you say a CNO is being treated like a nurse manager or a supervisor, it's like, well, you see them being talked to like that too by CFOs or by the director of quality. And it's like, are you kidding me right now? Like, I've never seen a CNO that's been treated that way, ever, right? Because in nursing, when you grow up, you think the CNO, it's like, she's the, everything. She's the, right? She's the, right?
Yeah.
But it was like, wow. But and that was the experience. And I had just had, just seeing like all of the turnover, nurses leaving, other nurses, leaders leaving, leaders needing to take like Xanax to get through the day, I have Xanax if you need it. No, I'm good. This is what is leading you to do.
Attention, aspiring entrepreneurs in the healthcare industry. Have you ever dreamt of starting your own successful IV hydration business? Well, your dream is about to become a reality. Imagine a business where you can make a difference in people's lives while building a thriving venture. We're excited to invite you to a free webinar that will unlock the secrets to launching a successful IV hydration business. Join us for an exclusive event where industry experts will share invaluable insight on the essential steps to launch your IV hydration business, building a six-figure business from scratch, navigating the challenges in the healthcare entrepreneurship journey. But that's not all. Attendees of the webinar will get a sneak peek into our comprehensive IV hydration on-demand course. Discover how this course has empowered others just like you to turn their passion into profit. Picture this: lifetime access to in-depth video trainings, business strategies, SOPs, and exclusive bonuses that can catapult your success.
Register now for our free webinar at https://apply.trueusavvy. That's truusavvy.com/training. Don't miss this opportunity to kickstart your journey to a rewarding and lucrative IV hydration business.
And I'm sure so many of our listeners can hear parts of your story or our story and identify with that. And that's probably where most of our listeners are, at that space where they know they're fed up, they're tired, they've seen things they wish they could unsee. When you were looking around as to what you could do, is entrepreneurship something that you always thought about, or what were kind of your first steps after, okay, I think I'm going to do something else for myself on the side? What did that look like?
That's a great question. It's interesting that you said that. So a friend of mine, we actually started as clinical nurse supervisors, like together. Like it was a new role that they started at. So I used to work at Alameda Hospital. I used to work in California. And so it was a new role that they started, and we both started as clinical nurse supervisors together. And the funny thing was, he reminded me just the other day, he saw something that I posted on LinkedIn, and he messaged me and he was like, I remember when you were saying that you wanted to be, an entrepreneur, and look at you now. And I was just like, really? I was saying that thing. I was like, really? I must have known, right? But for me, when I resigned from my job, I didn't have another job. I resigned because I had just had enough. And it was me being out is when I started really, because first I took time to prioritize me, right? I had to realize and figure out what I wanted to do, pray on it. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to do it yourself. You've been a nurse for all this time, because I almost lost my passion, and I really was losing my passion for it. So I was just like, I'm done. I'm done with nursing. I'm done. And as time went on, when I started really seeing certain things, I started seeing things, and I started meeting certain people and being in certain environments. And I started consulting, right? I started consulting kind of unofficially. So I didn't actually have a business, but this was part of building my business. So I started consulting so it kind of started as me consulting with family members, right? And so family members would tell other people like, oh, she's a nurse. And so it was kind of like more like patient advocacy I was consulting. So I will consult with them, telling them, what they should do with their medications and what they should do with their doctors. And so it was, my mother was like, you should be charging for this. And I was just, yeah, right? I should. It was like, a lot of it was word of mouth and I'd be consulting. So I kind of started building my business that way. And then I started doing some legal nurse consulting because someone had introduced me to an attorney, and I started doing some legal nurse consulting, and I got mentorship for that. And that was when I officially really opened my business. So it was patient advocacy I was doing, legal nurse consulting I was doing. And the legal nurse consulting was great. The patient advocacy, all of this consulting was great, which I still do. However, it's more of, I got introduced to IV hydration and the idea of doing that. And that was more about self-care. And that for me was more parallel with self-care for me, right? And self-care advocacy and being able to bring something to the community. And that was when I started like really getting my passion back for nursing. I was just like, okay, I started realizing, and even when I was doing the patient advocacy, I started realizing that I can help people in a different way. I don't have to be in a traditional setting, right? Like, I don't have to do that. Like, I don't have to be in a traditional setting. So I launched my consulting business has since exploded. I still have programs. So it's exploded to courses, like I said, mentoring, coaching. So I have on-demand courses for if you want to how to start a legal nurse consulting business. I have a course on how to start an IV hydration business. I have a course on ebook mastery, how to write an ebook. I have a course coming up on burnout prevention. So a lot of the consulting has been spun into, like I said, courses and mentorship. And then I still have my IV hydration business, which we've expanded to weight loss services. We offer NAD, and we're thinking about adding. I think the last time I talked to you, Chris, I was like, I don't know, hormone replacement therapy might be a way to go, right?
Yes.
But we're looking to add like more peptides and such, for anti-aging. So the business is doing really well in that way. But I got to say, it was starting my business is what really started to give my passion back to nursing, because I realized what I can do outside of the traditional setting. And that's when I said, like, everyone, like other nurses, and listen, when I say everyone, they at least need to know, right?
Yeah.
Because being a CEO, an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart, right? So it's just like nursing, it's not for the faint of heart. Right. And sometimes, people look at what we're doing and they think, it's easy. It's not necessarily that easy, especially when we talk, you need systems, you need processes, you need teams, right? Like we were talking about before, right? You need a good admin team. You need a good assistants. You need good nurses, especially if you have a practice where you need nurses. So like I've been lucky for the most part with my team, like the nurses that I have. They're wonderful. My assistant coaches, like my coaches for my mentoring program, like they're phenomenal because, they bring energy. And it's like, I feel like we bounce off of each other. Like when I don't have the energy, they do, right? When they, and vice versa. Yeah. So I love it. And I've been very lucky to have people who want to support the community with the summits that we've been hosting.
When did you first start into entrepreneurship? What year was that?
It's been like 3 years now.
So essentially that was pretty quickly that you have scaled up. So after taking it from family members, was there a point when you realized, because as you said, you had already resigned, you were working technically in your traditional hospital role, but I guess I'm asking, how long was it from when you kind of started and you put your energy into it to where you thought like, hey, maybe I don't need to apply for another job. Maybe I can keep this thing going. Were you thinking at that time you weren't going to work anymore at all, or were you just full blown into entrepreneurship? And at what point were you like, okay, I might be onto something? Guests want to hear like, how long can this take me?
Everybody is different, right? So I got a mentor because I realized that I did not want to be one of those YouTube university individuals, right? Because you can't learn everything off Google. You can't learn everything off of YouTube. I mean, can you find some helpful information? But if you really want to scale, it's really about collapsing time, right? That's why you get a mentor or a coach, so that you can collapse time. And that's what I did. So I got mentorship for each one of them. However, initially when I left, I was like, I'm never going back. But then I would do, and I still do so like CVS, like sometimes I'll go and do like flu shots and things, but that's more like, I almost feel like that's like community service. I think maybe the first year, I would never tell anyone like, oh, just quit your job and just go right into entrepreneurship, right? For me, which everyone's situation is different. For me, it was that because I was just kind of done, right? Like when I left and when I resigned from my job, I know I didn't have another job. And I started building my business. So that was just my story. However, most people use that job to help you build your business, right? Like that's kind of what I would tell anyone who's, doing it, who's thinking of leaving or starting in their own business now. Use your job to help you start your business. And that way, like I said, there's going to be struggles. There's going to be challenges. Yes, there's grants out there, but everybody's not getting them. So you probably hear about grants. Oh, get this grant. Like they're not that easy. So I actually was recently at the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative event last week, and my booth was right next to a young lady. I met her. We became like business besties. Like, oh, you're a business bestie. Like she was so sweet. She does government contracting. Okay, I say that, and I know like that's something that's becoming like very, very popular. But in DC, it's like everybody does government contracting, and so she's like, you gotta come on board. Because she's like, oh, I just had it was like a health and wealth. It was like a health and wellness virtual. All they needed was someone to do like a training for 2 trainings online, and it had to be in person. And that was a contract. And she was like, oh, if I met you on the 9th, we would have been signing you up for it. So it's being I say this, you got to be in the right rooms, right? So that you can know the right people. So, and I met so many wonderful people at that event. And she's one of those people, and like amongst others, like that's a network plug that I have for government contracting. Yeah. But you have to be in those right rooms in order to really be introduced to these opportunities.
And it's so important you say that because we try to encourage our listeners to get on planes, trains, boats, whatever you have to do to network and find your community. So how important has networking been for you in the success of your business, would you say?
Oh my gosh. Like networking has been, it's like you said, and being at that event in particular,
Yeah.
it was like,
Big one.
I was like, oh my God, I found my tribe. Because it's so, because you can go to some networking events, like, let's be honest, right? You can go to some networking events and you're just like, all right, why am I here? Right.
Yeah.
Then you can go to others, but you have to put yourself out there.
You have to go.
Then you
Right.
go to others and you're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I went. I'm never like not glad that I went. Like, yeah, I'm not, not glad that I went because it's always some type of, it's always something that comes out of whether it's a connection for the future, right? Like whether it's a phone number or email address or something. So you always can bump into someone, but that's good. But me personally, I actually like in-person events because I can remember when everything was virtual. Kind of like when I first started my business, like everything was like kind of virtual, right? And then slowly but surely we started introducing some, in-person things, but you had to have mask and all of that, right? Which was fine. And I actually host virtual events. It's the in-person events for me, like the networking events, that I really, 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 really appreciate. Like I really like the in-person because I'm an in-person person. Like I'm very personable. I'm very like be around. Like I'm a hugger. Like talk my crap. I walk away and like to just kind of talk to everyone. Sometimes you can't always do that in virtual settings.
I have a question, and this is kind of going. I have two questions. The first one.
We've covered some great insights so far, but the best is yet to come. Stay tuned for the second half of the Nurse Boss Shift. It's going to get even more exciting. See you again on Monday.